Thunder rumbled over the desert plains of New Mexico, lightning splitting the sky like nature's own gunfire. The year was 1887, and inside a modest adobe cabin on the outskirts of Sagebrush Creek, Elias Rhodes sat alone by his sputtering lantern. The howling wind threatened to tear his wooden shutters clean off their hinges. Then came the frantic knocking, a thunderous rap on the door, echoing through the storm. Heart-pounding, Elias swung the door open. There she stood, soaked to the bone, clutching a baby to her chest. Her voice trembled as she said, "He ain't yours, but he needs you." And with that single sentence, Elias's life changed forever. Elias Rhodes was a man who preferred the quiet. He had earned it, or so he thought, after years spent roaming from one dusty cattle trail to another, trying his hand at ranch work, horse breaking, and the occasional bounty hunt when the money got short. He'd finally saved enough coin to buy a modest patch of land near Sagebrush Creek. It wasn't much, just a couple of acres and a half-built cabin, but it was freedom. He owed no man anything, and for once in his life, his conscience felt almost clean. But that night, as he unlatched the door and looked into Josephine Cook's tear-stained eyes, he realized destiny had other plans. The baby in her arms was crying, its tiny face scrunched in hunger or cold. Maybe both. The rattling storm splashed raindrops across her shawl, drenching the worn linen. Josephine, the once proud daughter of a wealthy rancher, now looked like a ghost of her former self. Her hair hung in tangled wet cords, and her lips quivered with words she had probably rehearsed 1,000 times. Elias expected her to say, "He's your son," for he knew Josephine's reputation, knew she was once entangled with more than a few men across the territory. But nothing could prepare him for the actual words. "He ain't yours, but he needs you." A hush fell over them, as though even the storm was holding its breath. Elias stepped aside to let her in, his heart thudding louder than the thunder. He had not seen Josephine in nearly 2 years since a chance encounter at the Sagebrush Creek Saloon, where she sang ballads on busy nights. She had never come off as the maternal type. And yet here she was, trembling with a baby, clutched protectively to her breast. His cabin was little more than one large room, a pot-belly stove in the corner, a half-finished bed frame, and a table with 2 rickety chairs. That was the sum of his belongings, aside from the battered trunk where he stored a few changes of clothes. He hurried to stoke the fire, setting the lantern on the makeshift table. Then carefully he turned to the woman and child. "Josephine," he said at last, the syllables heavy in his mouth. "Who does the baby belong to? And why'd you come to me?" She settled onto the chair, her spine rigid. She pressed her lips together as though she was bracing for an explosion. "His father. He's gone. Ran off, or more likely got himself killed. I don't know. But I can't keep him. I can't protect him." So I thought. Her eyes flicked over the single bed frame and the sparse living area. "I thought maybe you'd do it. You're not the father, but you're the only one I trust. Please, Elias. He needs you." Elias took a cautious step toward Josephine. He had been around the block enough times to sense when a person was hiding half the story. He suspected she wasn't telling him everything about this child's lineage, or the dangers that came with it. The baby fussed in her arms, and Josephine instinctively rocked him. The softness in her eyes belied a maternal instinct that Elias would never have guessed she possessed. He felt a pang in his chest. The tension built with each passing heartbeat. "I can't raise a child," he said, his voice low. I live out here alone. Barely keep myself fed most days. Josephine, you got to explain. She shook her head. Water droplets scattering from her damp hair. The logs in the stove popped. You don't understand, Elias. I don't have a choice. If I keep him, men will come after us. They already threatened me once. The father's debts, his enemies, they're out there waiting. The only reason they ain't broken down my door is because of how quiet I left town. But I have no illusions they won't find me eventually. Elias rubbed a hand over his stubble, trying to think. The storm raged outside, and every crash of thunder felt like the gallop of outlaws drawing closer. Who were these men? Josephine bit her lower lip. A gang called the Black Hawks. They operate out near the border, smuggling contraband whiskey, stolen horses. The baby's father got in over his head with them. If they know he had a child, I can only imagine what they'd do. She looked down, tears welling up again. I hate myself for running. But if you don't help me, I don't know what's going to become of him. Elias closed his eyes. He tried to recall every rumor he'd ever heard about the Black Hawks. They were led by an ex-Confederate officer named Anton Faraday, a man rumored to show no mercy. Some said Faraday once shot a woman for refusing him a free drink. Others said he hanged a man just for looking at him the wrong way. Whether those stories were exaggerated or not, Elias had no desire to cross paths with the Black Hawks. Lightning illuminated Josephine's face. She was pleading, and for a fleeting moment, Elias remembered a simpler time the day he first came to Sagebrush Creek, trying to find a place to call home. Josephine had been on the stage at the saloon, singing Wayfaring Stranger. Her voice had cut through the smoky air, mesmerizing the rowdy crowd. Now that same voice trembled with dread. I'll help, he said slowly. But I need to know more. This child. Who is the father exactly? An outlaw, a gambler, a horse thief. Her shoulders slumped as though admitting it aloud would seal their fates. His name was Thomas Tommy Gun Miller. She whispered, eyes darting to the door, as if she expected Tommy to appear from the shadows. He started out as a card sharp. Then he fell into smuggling guns across the border. He ran with the Black Hawks for a time before double-crossing them in a deal gone wrong. The baby whimpered. Instinctively, Elias reached out, placing a rough, calloused palm against the back of the baby's head. So he's the child of a gun smuggler who cheated the Black Hawks. That's complicated and dangerous. I wish I had a better explanation. Josephine continued, her voice cracking. Tommy got me pregnant, but then he ran. For months I've been trying to hide. I left the saloon. I took odd jobs cleaning laundry, scrubbing floors, anything just to keep the baby fed and stay out of sight. But it wasn't enough. The Black Hawks figured out that Tommy had a woman. I heard rumors in town that they were sniffing around for me. Not a soul in Sagebrush Creek was safe if they knew where I was. She paused as though summoning her courage. Then I thought of you, she said softly. You used to care about me. I knew I could trust you. So I came here. Elias's chest tightened with a mixture of old memories and new responsibilities. He looked at Josephine, a woman he once might have pursued if circumstances had been different. He glanced at the baby, a tiny boy with the faintest wisp of dark hair, oblivious to the storms raging inside and out. How long do I have before they come looking? Elias asked. Josephine swallowed hard. I don't know. Maybe days, maybe weeks. But they'll come. Faraday never leaves a debt unsettled. The wind rattled the shutters again, and Elias made up his mind. He didn't know the first thing about raising a child, but if he turned them away, the baby would be in mortal danger, and Josephine might do something desperate. He sighed, shoulders sagging. All right. We'll figure something out. But first, let's get you both warm and rested. Tomorrow we talk to the sheriff. They spent the rest of the night listening to the rain pelt the roof in rhythmic sheets. Josephine dozed fitfully in Elias's only bed, the baby curled beside her, while Elias tried to keep the fire going. Sleep refused to come. He paced, boots thudding on the rough wooden floor, as he thought about the consequences of this choice. What if the Black Hawks tracked them here? Elias had a reputation for being handy with a revolver, but this was no ordinary gang of drunks. These men were ruthless. If they arrived in force, Elias would stand little chance. Eventually, the storm quieted to a drizzle, and dawn's first light crept through the window. Josephine stirred. The baby let out a few soft cries, quickly quieted when Josephine offered him the last of the goat's milk she had in a small flask. They had precious few supplies, Elias realized, and if he was going to take them in, he'd need more. The nearest town was a half-day's ride away. He cleared his throat. "Morning," he said. Josephine managed a faint smile, but the fear behind her eyes remained. "I'll ride to Sagebrush Creek in a few hours. Talk to Sheriff Whitlock. He might help us, or at least know if there are any new faces in town." Elias also knew Sheriff Whitlock from the days when the lawman had been a deputy under the famed Wyatt Earp in Dodge City. That was back when Earp traveled the frontier, dispensing his brand of justice. Sheriff Whitlock learned from one of the best, which made him tough and at times unyielding. Josephine carefully rocked the baby. "I'll stay here with him. I'm sorry, Elias. I never meant to drag you into this." He leaned against the doorframe, eyeing her. "You had to do something. It's all right. Just keep an eye out. If you see any riders approaching that you don't recognize, take the baby and hide behind the barn. There's a trapdoor in the floor where I store tools." She nodded, a new wave of anxiety washing over her. Elias saddled his horse, an aging but reliable sorrel mare named Clementine, and set off toward Sagebrush Creek. The morning air was crisp, the sky a pale grey remnants of storm clouds hovering. The trail to town was a winding path through scrubland and low hills. He knew every bump and rut by heart, having travelled it many times to purchase supplies or try his luck at a poker table in the local saloon. He recalled the first time he had come to Sagebrush Creek 4 years back. The place was hardly more than 24 buildings, perched on either side of a dusty main road. But the land was fertile compared to much of the surrounding desert, with a few ranches spread across the valley. Among them, the Cook Ranch had been the largest. Run by Josephine's father, Mitchell Cook, it boasted over 1,000 head of cattle and sweeping water rights to the creek. Josephine had grown up with every advantage: new dresses, a well-appointed home, even some schooling in Santa Fe. How she'd ended up a saloon singer, tangled with an outlaw fathering her child, was a tale of heartbreak that Elias only partly understood. She had defied her father's wishes, left the ranch in a blaze of rebellion. Her father had disowned her. She never went back. Elias tried to push those thoughts aside as he approached the outskirts of Sagebrush Creek. A few farmers on wagons rattled by, tipping their hats in weary greeting. In the distance, he saw the battered wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Sagebrush Creek." On the porch of the general store, an elderly man named Ernie Bledsoe was sweeping the boards. Ernie waved as Elias passed, but Elias didn't stop. His destination was the sheriff's office on the far side of town. He found Sheriff Whitlock sitting at his desk, a fresh pot of coffee steaming on the stove in the corner. The sheriff looked up, his grey mustache twitching. "Mornin', Elias," he said. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Elias shut the door quietly behind him. "Might as well have sheriff. I need to talk to you private-like." He cast a glance at the single holding cell near the back, where a drifter slept off a drunk. Whitlock stood motioning Elias closer. At over 6 feet, the sheriff was a formidable figure. He wore his gun belt low on his hips, and even though the days of the infamous gunfights had passed, he still carried himself like a lawman, always ready for trouble. "What is it, Rhodes? Ain't seen you around in weeks. You in trouble?" Elias shook his head, but he felt the knot in his gut tighten. "Not me specifically. Josephine Cook showed up at my cabin last night. She had a baby with her Tommy Miller's child." He paused, letting the sheriff piece together the significance. "She says the Black Hawks are after them." Sheriff Whitlock exhaled slowly, his expression grim. "Anton Faraday's outfit. Damn. I heard rumors they've been moving up this way. A few travelers came through last week, mentioning men with Black Hawk feathers on their hats. I hoped they were just passing through. Apparently not." Elias muttered. "Josephine says Tommy crossed them and now they want revenge. I'm guessing that includes the child." Whitlock scratched his chin. "She come here hoping we'd just lock 'em all up for safety, or is she wanting you to protect 'em? She wants me to keep the baby hidden. Maybe run for it if they get too close," Elias replied. "But I'm no match for a gang if they show up in force. I came to see if you got any help you can spare." Sheriff Whitlock walked over to the window and stared out at the dusty street. A few children chased each other, while a dog sprawled in the shade of a hitching post. "I got a deputy," he said, nodding toward the back. "But he's fresh out of Tucson green as spring grass. I can't send him alone against the Black Hawks, and we can't dispatch a posse unless there's a direct threat to the town. You know how folks here are. They don't want to stir the hornet's nest." He turned back to Elias, eyes narrow. "But I'll do what I can. Let me wire some people I know out in Las Cruces. They might have a line on Faraday's whereabouts." "Thank you, Sheriff," Elias said. "I figure Josephine and the baby can't stay at my place forever. Might be safer somewhere else. Any ideas?" Whitlock tapped his fingers on the desk. "Well, I heard Mitchell Cook, Josephine's pa, was near his end. Been real sick. The Cook Ranch is still big, but rumor says Mitchell hired extra guns to guard the place. Maybe Josephine could find some refuge there." Elias grimaced. He remembered how Josephine had burned that bridge. "I doubt she'll want to go back, especially with the old man. He disowned her." The sheriff shrugged. "It's an option. Another is heading out of state. Colorado, maybe. Or even California. These outlaws usually don't chase folks that far, unless there's a bounty. But from what you say, Faraday's got a personal vendetta." He sighed. "If you stay, you better stay armed and keep a watchful eye. I'll post a notice that any suspicious men in black hats or hawk feathers are to be reported." Elias nodded, rising to leave. "Thanks, Whitlock. Let me know if you hear anything. I'll buy supplies at the general store, then head back." Outside, the sun had broken through the lingering clouds, casting a brilliant glare off the wet streets. Elias felt a measure of relief that the sheriff was on his side. But it wasn't much. The law in these parts was thin, and the Black Hawks had earned a reputation for ambushing well-armed patrols. Still, it was a start. He walked to the general store, a modest clapboard building with a hand-painted sign that read Goldstein's Mercantile. Inside, a small bell jingled above the door as he entered. Rachel Goldstein, the owner's daughter, greeted him with a warm smile. She'd known Elias for years, often slipping him an extra jar of preserves when he was short on cash. "How can I help you today?" Elias, Rachel asked, her braided hair shimmering in the midday light. He tipped his hat politely. "Need some baby supplies?" The words felt foreign on his tongue. He was used to buying flour, beans, coffee, basic things for a single man, and enough food staples to last a while. Rachel gave him a curious look. "Baby supplies?" "Yeah, for a friend. She's in a pinch." He tried not to say more than necessary. There was no sense in letting gossip swirl. Rachel, being discreet by nature, didn't pry. She gathered cloth diapers, bottles, powdered milk, and some simple baby blankets. Elias added tins of beans, dried jerky cornmeal, and some sugar. He paid with what little money he had saved, and then asked Rachel to keep the specifics quiet. She gave a solemn nod, understanding that out here, privacy could be a matter of life and death. Before leaving, he also purchased an extra box of 44 cartridges and a second revolver. If trouble came, he wanted to be prepared. With the supplies loaded on Clementine, Elias headed back out of town. The ride felt longer this time, every rustle in the brush and silhouette on the horizon, making him tense with suspicion. He kept an eye out for strangers, but saw no one aside from a couple of ranch hands hauling feed. By late afternoon, he reached his homestead, relieved to see no sign of disturbance. The door to the cabin was shut, and the windows closed. Inside, Josephine sat on the floor, playing with the baby, who now giggled and cooed. The transformation in her demeanor from the previous night was striking. She looked less haunted, though the shadows under her eyes remained. Seeing Elias, she stood abruptly. "Did you talk to the sheriff?" Elias nodded, setting the supplies down. "Yes. He's aware of the situation, but he can't do much unless we have a direct threat in town. We'll have to look after ourselves until then. Here brought some things for the baby." He handed her the bundle of cloth diapers and other necessities. She accepted them, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you." She spread out the blankets, and the baby made happy gurgling sounds. I was worried we'd be living off the scraps I had left. "This is more than I expected." Elias cleared his throat. "I'm not exactly sure how to take care of an infant, but I did my best guessing." Then he hesitated. "The sheriff mentioned your father said he's ill. Might be an opportunity for you to go back, get the ranch's protection." A dark cloud passed over Josephine's face. "I'd rather take my chances with the Black Hawks than beg for forgiveness from a man who never forgave me for leaving in the first place. He hated Tommy. He hated that I left the ranch to sing in a saloon. No Elias, that's not an option." She paused, her expression falling. "Besides, I heard from a traveling peddler that my father wrote me out of his will. There's nothing for me there." Elias studied her. He could see the heartbreak behind her words, the regret for a life that could have been so different. But the baby squirmed, and Josephine returned her attention to him, smoothing a blanket over his tiny form. Something about the tender gesture tugged at Elias's heart. He wondered how a hardened outlaw like Tommy Miller could have ever attracted a woman like Josephine, who clearly had more capacity for love than she'd been credited for. They spent the evening settling into an uneasy domestic routine. Josephine boiled water to clean the bottles, while Elias stowed the extra food in the corner cupboard. At one point, she tried to make small talk, asking about his ranching and how he ended up in this remote part of the territory. He answered in short sentences, uncomfortable with the intimacy forced upon them by circumstance. After dinner, cornmeal mush for the grown-ups and warmed milk for the baby, Josephine sat near the stove rocking the boy to sleep. Elias stepped outside to smoke a hand-rolled cigarette, thoughts swirling. He gazed across the darkening plains. The sky was painted in warm hues of orange and red from the setting sun, but all he could think about was the threat lurking out there. Would Faraday's men find them? Would they have to run or fight? When he went back inside, he found Josephine dozing against the bed frame, the baby in her arms. Elias gently took the sleeping child and laid him in a makeshift cradle he'd fashioned out of an old laundry basket. Then he draped a blanket over Josephine's shoulders. He realized he was exhausted too. He blew out the lantern and stretched out on the floor gun belt within arm's reach. Tomorrow, they would figure out what came next. The next few days passed in a haze of tension. Elias set about reinforcing the cabin, boarding up a few weak spots in the walls and shoring up the front door with extra planks. He taught Josephine how to handle a revolver, though she was reluctant to learn. "I hate guns," she muttered, her hand trembling when she held the cold metal. But Elias insisted, explaining that if he was away and danger came, she had no other means to protect herself and the baby. In between these tasks, Elias found himself unexpectedly bonding with the infant. He discovered that the boy had a quiet, curious nature. One morning, while Josephine took a moment to wash herself in the creek, Elias caught himself cooing at the baby, making silly faces just to elicit a tiny laugh. It surprised him how easily the child's innocence could melt his guarded heart. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Josephine confided in Elias about her past. She admitted she once fancied him when he first arrived in Sagebrush Creek. "You were different from the other men in the saloon," she said softly, as they sat outside, baby in her lap. "You didn't stare at me like I was a piece of meat." "You listened to my singing, really listened." She glanced at him, searching his face for something. "I wish I had gotten to know you better back then." Elias exhaled, unsure how to respond. He remembered those days. He'd been too broke, too proud, and too unsure of himself to approach a woman like Josephine. "Well, things turned out different," he said, letting the silence hang in the cooling air. They didn't have time to delve deeper. A horse's neigh carried over the wind, startling them both. Elias jumped to his feet, grabbing his rifle from inside the cabin. Josephine clutched the baby tightly. A lone rider approached from the east, leading another horse behind him. Elias recognized the rider as Deputy Max Harding, Sheriff Whitlock's greenhorn deputy. The young man tugged on the reins, guiding his paint mare close to Elias's homestead. His dusty bandana hung loose around his neck, and sweat darkened the brim of his hat. He held up a hand in greeting. "Sheriff Whitlock sent me." Max called, dismounting slowly. He was barely in his early 20s, hair the color of straw, and a face still showing traces of boyish innocence. "Said you might need some extra muscle if trouble was coming." Elias lowered his rifle, but didn't set it aside. "Any news?" Max nodded, swallowing. "Yeah. A traveler came through town with a story of 4 men wearing Black Hawk feathers. They were questioning folks on the road about a woman and a baby. The traveler said they were armed to the teeth." Josephine sucked in a shaky breath behind Elias, and the baby started fussing, sensing her distress. Elias motioned for Max to follow him inside. Once the door was shut, the deputy repeated the account in detail. According to the traveler, the men had brandished guns, demanded information, and made it clear they were searching for Tommy Miller's brat. The traveller hadn't known anything, so they let him go, but not before warning that they'd be back. "Sheriff thought you'd want a heads up," Max said. "He also thought I could lend a hand here for a while, keep watch. I know I'm green, but I can shoot straight." Elias eyed the young deputy. "I won't turn down help, but if things get too hairy, you can't stay here alone." Josephine stared at the deputy with a mixture of hope and dread. "Do you think they're coming soon?" she whispered. Max shrugged. "They could be. Or they might head toward the border if they suspect Tommy's gone that way. Hard to say. But from what the sheriff told me, Faraday's men don't usually quit." So began a vigil. Deputy Harding set up a small camp outside the cabin, just out of sight from the main road. Elias and Josephine took turns watching from the window or the roof, though climbing up there was precarious. Each day, Elias practiced shooting with both Josephine and Max to ensure they could coordinate if a fight broke out. The baby's cries, while normal for an infant, were nerve-wracking in the tense atmosphere. On the third day of the deputy's presence, they caught sight of a dust cloud rising in the distance. Elias, heart hammering, climbed onto the roof with his rifle. Sure enough, 2 riders were approaching, but they weren't wearing any black feathers that he could see. Closer inspection showed them to be ranch hands from the Carter Ranch. One of them waved, calling, "We're looking for Elias Rhodes." Elias lowered his rifle, signaled for them to come closer. Down below, Josephine cradled the baby, ready to bolt if the situation soured. The ranch hands arrived, bearing a simple message. They had a wagon of feed that needed mending, and they'd heard Elias was handy with carpentry. He offered a swift apology, explaining he was busy with personal matters and couldn't come to the ranch. The men shrugged, said they'd try a different handyman in town, and rode off. The knot in Elias's stomach didn't loosen until he watched their dust fade on the horizon. That evening, after a dinner of beans and cornbread, Deputy Harding mentioned that word was spreading around Sagebrush Creek about Josephine's return. Gossip traveled fast in small towns. Some folks even claimed they had seen her baby, and that the father was none other than Tommy Miller. "We gotta be careful," Harding warned. "With rumors spreading, it's only a matter of time before one of Faraday's men hears the wrong piece of gossip." Josephine grew more anxious with every passing day. She barely slept. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and even the baby sensed her unease. Elias tried to keep her spirits up, telling stories of his travels. Funny mishaps breaking horses, or times he'd tried gold panning in the mountains. Yet the threat hanging over them was too heavy. Even the most amusing anecdotes barely pulled a smile from her. Then one evening, as crimson skies bled into twilight, a lone rider galloped up to the homestead. Elias, Josephine, and Max rushed outside, weapons in hand, to see a figure slumped over the saddle. It was a familiar face, old Doc Harrington from town, his clothes splattered with blood, eyes wide with horror. Elias helped him down from the horse, while Max checked for wounds. "It's not mine," Doc gasped, pointing to the blood on his shirt. "It's Mitchell Cook. He's been shot." Josephine let out a strangled cry. My father, Doc, nodded, his voice trembling. Men with black feathers on their hats rode onto the Cook Ranch. I was there paying a medical visit. Mitchell tried to confront them. They shot him. Badly wounded. Deputy Harding's jaw clenched. Did they say anything? Why target the old man? Doc Harrington wiped his brow. They demanded to know the whereabouts of Josephine Cook and her baby. Mitchell refused to speak, even cursed them. He tried to reach for his old rifle, but they gunned him down without mercy. They left him bleeding in the yard. I managed to get him inside, stopped the worst of it. He's not dead yet, but he's in a bad way. Asked for you, Josephine. Begged me to find you. Josephine's tears flowed. She was torn between rage and heartbreak. He protected me. After all these years, Elias guided Doc Harrington inside, giving him water, while Josephine rocked the baby in stunned silence. Max hovered near the door, scanning the darkness for any sign of the black-feathered riders. How many men? Elias asked quietly. Doc rubbed his temple. 4, maybe 5. They wore bandanas over their faces, but I saw those black hawk feathers, just like folks been saying. They threatened to burn the ranch if Mitchell didn't talk. He told them to rot in hell. Then one of them shot him, left him for dead. Josephine's despair turned to fury. I have to go to him, Elias, she said, voice shaking. He's my father. Elias exchanged a look with Deputy Harding. That's exactly what they want. Harding said, his expression grim. They figure if they draw you out, you'll rush to your father's side. Then they have you and the baby. Josephine clutched her child. I can't let him die alone. Not after he tried to protect me. She paced the cabin, anguish evident in every step. I never thought he cared. But he did. I won't abandon him again. Elias placed a hand on her arm gently. If we go, we need a plan. The Cook Ranch is out in the open, easy for an ambush. You and the baby are prime targets. Deputy Harding stepped forward, clearing his throat. Sheriff Whitlock might form a posse now. We've got a shooting property damage. That's more than enough reason to raise men. He turned to Josephine. But it'll take time to gather them, maybe by morning. Will your father last that long? Doc Harrington answered, grief etched on his face. He's stable for now, but time is short. He's asked specifically for Josephine. He's delirious, calling out her name. If we don't act soon, he might pass before morning. A hush settled over the small cabin. The baby fussed, feeling Josephine's tension. Elias took in the scene. Josephine, trembling with maternal and filial protectiveness. The doc exhausted and spattered in someone else's blood. The deputy looking torn between his sense of duty and the reality of their peril. Finally, Elias said, Let's go. Tonight. Max's eyes widened. Just the 4 of us. Elias nodded. We can't wait. We'll keep quiet approach from the backside of the ranch. With luck, those men won't expect us to come at night. If Mitchell's still alive, Josephine can see him. Then we figure out how to get him somewhere safe. The deputy swallowed hard, but he agreed. Josephine looked relieved, though still terrified. She hurried to pack a small bag of essentials for the baby milk diapers, blankets. Elias loaded his rifle strapped on his revolver and double-checked the rounds. Max did the same, and Doc Harrington gathered his medical kit. Within half an hour, they were saddled up and riding under the cover of darkness, leaving Elias's homestead behind. Thunder still echoed in the distance, a reminder of recent storms, but now the night was eerily still. Their horses' hooves clopped softly on the dusty ground. Josephine carried the baby in a sling, ensuring he was tucked warmly against her chest. Elias rode beside her, scanning the terrain. Deputy Harding brought up the rear, while Doc Harrington guided them, having traveled from the Cook Ranch earlier. As they neared the ranch, the faint glow of lanterns flickered in the distance. They dismounted behind a small stand of mesquite trees, tying the horses securely. Doc Harrington led them to a side entrance used mainly by ranch hands. Every nerve in Elias's body was on high alert. Any rustle of wind or snap of a branch could herald the arrival of the Black Hawks. But the ranch yard was eerily quiet, the main house looming like a sleeping beast. Josephine clutched Elias's arm, her breath quivering. Inside the ranch house was dimly lit. A single lantern burned on a table in the foyer, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The place smelled of antiseptic and old wood, with a faint coppery tang of blood in the air. Doc Harrington led them down a hallway to Mitchell Cook's bedroom. No guards, no sign of the outlaws, only the hush of a household in shock. Josephine entered first, ignoring Elias's warning glance. The baby stirred but did not cry. On a large bed in the center of the room lay Mitchell Cook, pale sweat shining on his brow, a bandage wrapped around his torso. A young ranch hand who'd been sitting by the bed jumped up when they entered. Recognizing Josephine, he nodded in respect and backed away. Josephine sank to her knees beside the bed. "Pa," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. The older man's lids fluttered open. His gaze focused on Josephine with obvious difficulty. He tried to speak, but only managed a rasping sound. Josephine leaned in close, holding his hand. "I'm here," she said softly. Mitchell's voice came in weak gasps. "You came." His eyes flickered over the baby in her arms, and for a moment a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My grandson," he coughed, wincing. Josephine's tears fell freely. "I'm sorry, Pa. I'm so sorry. You should have let me help. I never wanted to leave like that." He squeezed her hand weakly. "I was stubborn, foolish." Another cough rattled his chest. "Wanted you to be safe. Not with that Miller. But I never stopped caring." He swallowed painfully. "They came for you." I wouldn't talk. Deputy Harding hovered near the doorway, rifle in hand, while Elias and Doc Harrington busied themselves checking the room. No sign of any immediate threat. Elias tried to steel himself for what might come next, but seeing Josephine's agony was almost unbearable. Mitchell's labored breath filled the silence. He motioned for Josephine to lean closer. "There's a trunk," he wheezed. "Under the floorboards. Closet. Letters. Deed. All yours. Take them. Run if you must." He coughed again, his voice cracking. "I'm proud of you, Josie." Tears streamed down Josephine's cheeks. She pressed her lips to her father's forehead. "Pa, please rest." Doc Harrington gently nudged her aside. He checked Mitchell's bandages, administered some laudanum for the pain, and shook his head grimly. "The bullet tore through vital organs," Doc explained in a hushed tone. "He's fading. Might have hours, might have a day, but not much longer." Josephine bowed her head, heartbreak swallowing her words. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Elias and the deputy exchanged tense glances, both aware that the Black Hawks could return any moment to finish the job. Yet the old man deserved these final moments with his daughter. Suddenly the baby let out a small wail. Josephine instinctively rocked him, trying to soothe his cries. Mitchell turned his head slightly, his dim eyes locking on to the infant. Weakly, he raised a trembling hand. Josephine brought the baby closer. "His name is Elijah," she managed, voice hitching. "After She looked over at Elias, searching for confirmation. She hadn't named the baby until now, but somehow the name suited him a nod to Elias's quiet strength, though she altered it slightly. Elias blinked, touched but unsure what to say. She turned back to her father. "Meet Elijah Miller, cook." A faint smile curved Mitchell's lips. "A cook," he whispered. Then he closed his eyes, fatigue claiming him. They stayed in that room for several hours, listening to Mitchell's ragged breathing, occasionally stepping out to watch for trouble. The ranch hands who remained were too afraid to confront the Blackhawks if they returned, though they swore to protect the house as best they could. Josephine barely left her father's side, whispering apologies and regrets, tears falling onto the rough blanket covering his chest. Elias paced the hall, checking in on them periodically. He felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Sympathy for Josephine's pain, guilt for resenting the danger she'd brought to his door, and anger at the men who had no qualms about murdering an old man. Deputy Harding remained vigilant in the foyer eyes, scanning each window. Doc Harrington readied fresh bandages, though they both knew the outcome seemed inevitable. Near midnight, Mitchell stirred again, beckoning Josephine closer. His voice was ragged. "I wrote you out of the will. Out of anger," he managed. "But I have the deed. It's yours." He drew a shuddering breath. "Ranch hands? They're loyal. Said they'd follow you if you come back." His gaze flickered to Elias standing at the doorway. He nodded faintly, then coughed. "He's a good man." "Josephine." Josephine smoothed her father's hair. "I know, Pa. Rest." She glanced over her shoulder at Elias, lips trembling. Her father's endorsement felt like a final blessing. Then, with a final gasp, Mitchell Cook's body went still. Josephine let out an anguished sob, burying her face against the baby, who whimpered as if sensing her grief. Doc Harrington checked for a pulse, then stood quietly, eyes downcast. "He's gone," the doc said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. The hush that settled over the Cook ranch was thick with sorrow. A faithful ranch hand, Samuel offered to prepare Mitchell's body for burial. The rest of the crew gathered in the front room, speaking in hushed tones. They were men who remembered Josephine as a lively girl, running through these halls. Now she stood before them, a grieving daughter, a baby in her arms. Elias and Deputy Harding still kept watch, acutely aware that the killers could return at any moment. Josephine retreated to a small sitting room away from prying eyes. Elias followed, finding her trembling with silent tears. He approached slowly, uncertain how to comfort her. Finally he said, "I'm sorry." She nodded, trying to compose herself. "He protected me, Elias, even after all I did. Leaving him, he never stopped caring." She hugged Elijah tighter. "I feel like a fool for not coming back sooner." Elias put a tentative hand on her shoulder. "You couldn't have known. He was stubborn, and so were you. Sometimes that's how families are." He paused, searching for the right words. "You said you didn't think you had a home here anymore, but it seems your father wanted you to inherit this place. That means something." Josephine looked around the room, eyes wandering over paintings of her mother, whom she barely remembered, and the furniture she used to play hide-and-seek behind. "I don't know if it's safe. The Blackhawks know about the ranch. They might come back." She swallowed hard. "But these ranch hands, they have nowhere else to go. They rely on the Cook Ranch for their livelihoods. If I flee, they'll be vulnerable." Elias admired her sense of responsibility, but he also feared for her life. "We can figure it out. First, we have to bury your father. Then we decide how best to protect this place and the people on it." She touched the baby's small hand. "He deserves a place to grow up without fear, Elias. I can't keep running forever." By dawn, word had spread around the valley that Mitchell Cook had died. A few neighbors arrived to pay respects, offering condolences to Josephine. They also brought news. 4 riders had been spotted near the old Stagecoach Road, a known route for outlaws traveling west. The sightings matched the description of the Black Hawks. Tensions soared. People whispered that Josephine should leave, or that the ranch was now marked for destruction. Still, Josephine insisted on staying at least long enough to give her father a proper burial. Deputy Harding and Elias agreed to stand guard during the service. Doc Harrington promised to stay until the threat passed, though that was wishful thinking. Together they arranged a simple funeral by the family plot next to the ranch house. Josephine, dressed in black, veiling her face, while the baby snoozed in her arms. Elias stood beside her heart, heavy, as the ranch hands lowered Mitchell Cook's casket into the ground. When the short service was over, the small crowd dispersed, casting worried glances at the hills. Josephine lingered, tears slipping beneath her veil, dripping onto the baby's blanket. Elias gently guided her back inside, shutting the door on the fresh grave. Inside, the ranch hands looked to Josephine for leadership. Samuel the foreman came forward. "Miss Cook, if you choose to stay, we'll stand with you. But we're scared. Those men, we don't want trouble, but we won't let them burn down what Mr. Cook worked so hard to build." Josephine's voice trembled, but determination shone in her eyes. "Thank you, Samuel. I won't abandon you. If we leave, we lose everything. If we stay, we fight to protect our home." She glanced at Elias and Harding. "Will you help us?" Elias nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can. But we'll need more men, more guns. Deputy, can we get that posse?" Harding sighed. "Sheriff Whitlock's due any day with reinforcements. I sent a rider to update him after we got here last night. We just got to hold tight until they arrive. They spent the next 2 days fortifying the ranch. The hands boarded up windows, set up barricades near the barn, and stationed lookouts on the roof. Josephine stayed mostly inside with baby Elijah, though she helped plan the defenses, refusing to stand idle. Elias admired her grit. The saloon singer he once knew had transformed into a resolute mother and reluctant ranch owner determined to safeguard her legacy. Deputy Harding drilled the ranch hands in basic shooting positions. Some were shaky with guns, preferring lariats and branding irons, but necessity forced them to learn fast. Elias took the night watch, perched on the second-floor balcony, with a rifle across his lap. His eyes scoured the darkness for movement, heart pounding each time a coyote howled or an owl screeched. Late on the second night, he spotted faint movement near the fence line. A flicker of moonlight reflected off something metal, maybe a gun barrel. Adrenaline surged. He nudged the ranch hand stationed beside him, who readied his weapon. A moment later, a small group of riders appeared, silhouettes against the starlit sky. Elias swallowed hard. He counted 4. Each wore a wide-brimmed hat, dark shapes pinned to the band feathers. No doubt, the Black Hawks had come. Elias signaled the watchman to ring the bell. Within seconds, the ranch yard erupted into quiet chaos. Men scrambled to their positions, guns drawn. Josephine clutched the baby inside the house, her face a mask of anxiety. Doc Harrington crouched by a window holding an old shotgun, though he looked terrified. Deputy Harding barked orders, urging everyone to hold fire until the outlaws made a move. Night fell with a foreboding stillness, broken only by the sound of Elias's boots pacing the balcony and the faint cry of baby Elijah inside. Then a flash of movement on the horizon, a dust cloud. He froze. "They're here," he muttered, heart tightening. 4 riders approached, slowly, wide-brimmed hats casting deep shadows. Black feathers were tucked into each hatband. Down below, Deputy Harding rang the bell. Ranch hands scrambled to take position, rifles ready. Inside, Josephine clutched Elijah close, her breath catching as the baby began to fuss. Doc Harrington hovered nearby, shotgun shaking in his hands. The outlaws halted near the gate. One dismounted, tall, broad, and unmistakably Anton Faraday. His voice boomed across the yard. "Bring me the woman and the brat, and the rest of you live," Harding called back, defiant. "This ranch is under the law's protection. Turn back or face fire," Faraday laughed darkly. "Law, I am the law out here." He gave the signal. Chaos erupted. Gunfire split the night. Torches hurled through the air. One landed on the porch roof, igniting a blaze. Ranch hands returned fire from barricades. Elias fired from the balcony, narrowly missing a charging rider. Harding dropped to one knee, placing 2 precise shots that forced the gang to take cover. Inside, Josephine ducked as a bullet shattered the window. Elijah screamed. "Doc!" she whispered frantically. "The trap door." They pushed aside a rug and revealed the old cellar hatch. Just as Doc opened it, another gunshot rang out. This time closer. Outside, Faraday made his move. He burst through the front gate on horseback, guns blazing. A ranch hand fell. Harding rolled and fired, hitting Faraday's horse. The beast bucked, and Faraday tumbled to the ground. Elias leapt down from the balcony, rifle in hand. Faraday rose with a snarl, revolver empty, and lunged at Elias with a gleaming Bowie knife. They clashed in the yard, surrounded by smoke and flame. Faraday's blade sashed Elias, swung his rifle like a club. They crashed to the dirt, wrestling the knife inches from Elias's chest. Then bang! Faraday jerked. Behind him stood Josephine, shaking revolver in both hands. "Stay away from my family," she said, voice fierce, despite the tears streaming down her face. Faraday fell. The remaining Black Hawks surrendered shortly after, stunned by the sight of their leader gunned down by a mother defending her child. The barn fire was finally extinguished. Wounded men were tended to. Elias sat beside Josephine, her hands still trembling as she held Elijah. "You saved me," he whispered. She shook her head. "No, we saved each other." The night exploded with fire and fury. Anton Faraday, himself leader of the Black Hawks, charged the Cook Ranch under the cover of darkness, shouting for blood and retribution. "Hand over the woman and the child," he roared. "Tommy Miller's brat is mine." Elias and Deputy Harding were already in position, flanked by trembling but determined ranch hands. Inside the house, Josephine clutched baby Elijah to her chest, while Doc Harrington stood by with a shotgun, sweat glistening on his forehead. The standoff shattered as Faraday gave the order. "Burn it down." Gunfire tore through the night. Torches flew over the fence, igniting the porch roof. Elias returned fire from the balcony, narrowly missing an outlaw's shoulder. Harding barked orders, keeping the defenders focused. Amid the chaos, the baby wailed a haunting backdrop to the fury outside. Suddenly, Faraday himself leapt the gate on horseback, guns blazing. Elias scrambled down just in time to face him. They clashed in the firelight, bullets flying, fists swinging. Faraday's blade glinted as he tackled Elias to the ground, knife raised high. Elias gritted his teeth, trying to hold him off, until a gunshot cracked through the storm. Faraday slumped, stunned. Behind him stood Josephine, her hands trembling around a smoking revolver. "Stay away from my family," she whispered, voice fierce. Faraday collapsed. The fight wasn't over, but his fall shattered the outlaw's momentum. Harding and the others pushed back, cornering the last of the gang. 2 surrendered. 1 lay wounded in the dirt. The fire was extinguished, the gunfire faded, and dawn crept over a battered, smoke-laced horizon. Sheriff Whitlock arrived hours later with reinforcements. He took in the scorched porch, the scattered bodies, and the exhausted defenders, then clapped Elias on the back. "Hell of a stand." Josephine, still shaking, stood with Elijah in her arms. "It's over," she murmured, but her voice didn't hold certainty, just relief. In the days that followed, repairs began. Josephine took quiet command of the ranch, honoring her father's legacy. She paid fair wages, protected the hands, and raised Elijah under the wide New Mexico sky. Elias, his arm bandaged, stayed to help rebuild. He didn't say much, but every evening found him sitting beside Josephine on the porch, watching the boy crawl across a patchwork quilt. One evening, with the sun dipping below the hills, Josephine turned to Elias. "You could have walked away." He glanced down at Elijah, who babbled happily. "Didn't want to. Guess I found something worth standing still for." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "He ain't yours," she whispered, echoing the words that had started it all. "But he needs you. And so do I." Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand found hers, and in the silence between them, something rooted itself stronger than blood, more enduring than fear. They had survived the storm, and now, with the past behind them and the future uncertain, they had each other. And that was enough. Out of the ashes of violence, Josephine found a home she thought she'd lost forever, alongside a man who'd once lived as a solitary wanderer and a baby born under a storm of danger. Together they forged hope in a land as untamed as their hearts, proving that family is more than blood and that courage is born in the moments when we stand up for those who can't stand alone. If you found yourself holding your breath during this Wild West tale of redemption, heartbreak, and unexpected love, imagine what other thrills await. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more stories that reach deep into the human spirit and remind us all that even in the darkest nights, a single knock on the door can change everything. Your support keeps these frontier legends alive. Thank you for tuning in, partners.